we had the G20 foreign ministers meeting in New Delhi. Let's put that on the screen. Where are we? G20. So this is a very challenging time to be the president of the G20, because there is this war going on and there is no consensus among the G20 nations, especially China and Russia, are not willing to agree to whatever the West is saying. So let's put this on the screen. Grand test for Indian diplomacy as American, Chinese, and Russian ministers meet in Delhi. So India is the president of the G20 this year, and it's come at the toughest time because there's a war going on, and there is a reorientation of the global geopolitical landscape that's happening. Russia is essentially more or less isolated by the West. The Chinese are cooperating and collaborating with the Russians. India obviously has not isolated Russia. India and Russia are still on very good terms, and India is buying lots of oil. But apart from that, Russia is isolated from the West. So, excuse me. So, grand test for Indian diplomacy. And then that's what happened. This is a report from one day ago. Bitter divisions over over the Ukraine war, they mar the talks at the G20 foreign ministers meeting. So this was a 2-day G20 foreign ministers meeting that concluded very recently, like yesterday, I think, in New Delhi. Representatives of, I think, approximately 40 nations were invited, and representatives of various other international organizations were also invited. And obviously you had the big nations: China, Russia, India, and the US, foreign ministers of these nations. So all of these people attended the event. This was the largest G20 foreign ministers meeting in history. That's what happened in New Delhi. And there was no consensus because the Western nations, the US, Germany, and whoever else, the UK, they wanted to use certain paragraphs, certain language in the document which comes at the end of the meeting, which Russia and China did not agree to. So the meeting failed to achieve a consensus. So you could say that it was a failure, but that's not. It's not an Indian failure; it's a G20 failure because the foreign ministers failed to come to a consensus and agree to a common statement. So because of that, India released a chair's summary and outcome document, which was not a unanimously accepted document, and you can see this. It says over here, all G20 foreign ministers agreed to paragraphs 1, 2, and paragraphs 5 to 24, which tells us that paragraphs 3 and 4 were the contentious paragraphs that not everybody agreed to. And paragraph 3 is about the war in Ukraine, and it's about blaming Russia and all those things. And paragraph 4 also is about that, essential to uphold international law and multilateral system, which means the US-led rules-based system, and all those things. So Russia and China did not agree to paragraphs 3 and 4, but the other nations insisted on keeping this in the document. So it has been clearly mentioned here that all foreign ministers agreed to paragraphs 1, 2, and 5 to 24, but not 3 and 4. So this is the document that India, as the president of the G20, released at the end of the day. And Mr. Modi himself addressed the opening segment of the G20 foreign ministers meeting. And it was a rare occasion on which Mr. Modi actually delivered his address in English, which indicates how serious he was about this thing, and he wanted everyone to understand exactly what he is saying. So it was inaugurated with this speech, this address by Prime Minister Modi, and then we had this outcome meeting. And one of the most important things that came out of this meeting is the first contact between the US and Russia since the Ukraine war began. So the first contact happened between Mr. Blinken, the US Secretary of State, and Mr. Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. They spoke briefly on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meeting. So this is the first top-level diplomatic contact between the two nations for the past for more than 1 year. So this is something excuse me, which happened in New Delhi. So that's what these news reports are. You can see the two gentlemen together, very close to each other, and they met briefly. The Russians are claiming that the contact was initiated by the Americans, and the two foreign ministers did not have a structured sit down meeting. They simply spoke informally for about 10 minutes or so. And this is a report in which Mr. Blinken is saying that he told Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to end this war of aggression, and Russia must engage in meaningful diplomacy that can produce a just and durable peace. The same talking points that we've been hearing for the longest time. So essentially, the Americans gave three major messages to the Russians. Firstly, it was about the New START treaty that the Russians have withdrawn. I mean, they have suspended. Mr. Putin recently announced that he is suspending Russia's participation in the New START treaty. So I've spoken about this in the past. I will not go into the details right now. So the first message from America to Russia was that Russia needs to rejoin the New START treaty. That's the first demand or message that was conveyed. The second one was that Russia should reactivate grain shipments from Ukraine. So the Americans are essentially blaming Russia for the fact that grain is not coming out of Ukraine. Well, the Russians are saying that it's the Ukrainians who are not allowing the grain to come out. So whatever the what the truth is, we don't quite know unless you go and you have a presence on the ground and see what's really happening. So the Americans, secondly, they said Russia needs to reactivate grain shipments from Ukraine. And thirdly, the message from the US to Russia was that the US will support Ukraine as long as it takes. In other words, the Americans will continue this proxy war to the last Ukrainian, as long as the last Ukrainian soldier is alive. Essentially, that's what it means. What the Russians conveyed to the US, we're not quite sure, because the Russians have not given out any statement. So that's the one of the major things that happened in the G20 foreign ministers meeting. And of course, Mr. Dr. Jaishankar has been tweeting about the proceedings. He had a wide-ranging discussion with Foreign Minister Lavrov on the G20 foreign ministers meeting sidelines. So this was a proper structured meeting. It was not a standing meeting which happened for 10 minutes. It was a proper meeting. And obviously, we can see the meeting with Secretary of State Blinken as well. You can see both of them they seem pretty happy with with how things have gone. So it was an opportunity to review bilateral ties and discuss global issues. And yeah, that's what it was. Um, Now the EU's Mr. Borrell, who has been in the news of late for a few on occasion, he has said that the G20 is no longer an economic forum, which means we will now engage in all kinds of geopolitical activities as part of the G20 proceedings. See, historically, if you look at the history of the G20, it has been the purpose or the objective, not the stated one, but the actual objective has been to facilitate trade and finance and economic activities. That's been the main purpose of the G20 ever since the G20 was instituted. So the first G20 summit happened in 1999, and the G20 was formed in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis, which was precipitated by Mr. George Soros. It was in 97 or somewhere around that time. So the G20 has been a forum of economic and financial cooperation. That's mainly what it is. But now the West is using the G20 as a tool to further their geopolitical messaging, their geopolitical objectives. So that's what the G20 is now being redefined as. So Mr. Borrell of the EU is now explicitly stating that he is saying the G20 is no longer an economic forum. So the G20 is dominated by the West. India and China are, and some other nations of the so-called global South are the only nations that are not Western nations in the G20. So it's dominated by the powerful, rich Western nations that form the G7 bloc essentially, and they are still trying to drive the agenda of the G20. And now they are trying to redefine the G20 as something that, as a group that will be used for geopolitical and other kind of messaging as well. And day after the meeting, Blinken and Lavrov exchanged diplomatic swipes. So they are now sniping at each other. And yeah, well, that's not a very big surprise. The other interesting thing that came out is this: a very warm welcome for Germany's foreign minister in India. So typically, when a high-ranking diplomat goes on a visit to another nation, they are treated as per a certain protocol, And especially if the relations between the two nations are good, then they are given a very warm welcome, red carpet treatment, lots of high ranking officials there to welcome you when you touch down. So this is the welcome that the German foreign minister got in India. She gets down, there is no red carpet, she's given the there's no one to meet her. There's a very, I mean, I don't know who this gentleman is. He obviously is a well, represent the government, but that's not the kind of welcome she would otherwise get. And then one of her own officials comes and greets her. So yeah, that's the kind of welcome the German foreign minister got in India. Now Germany has been very, you know, recently the German chancellor came to India, and the German ambassador to in India, before the visit of the chancellor, had said that Germany would discuss India's internal affairs with India, India's so-called human rights situation and democracy and all that. So see, understand, Germany is a tool in the hands of NATO, which is the US. Germany is not a sovereign nation. It is under foreign military occupation, US military occupation, since the end of the Second World War. The German constitution has been written by the Americans by proxy. So Germany is not a sovereign nation. It is German foreign policy is an extension of the US foreign policy. And they have been, acting up in this matter. So India has given a very significant message to Germany by giving this welcome, this so-called welcome to the German foreign minister. And yeah, somebody is saying we should have put a banana peel on the stairs. The people are her driver and planes refueling guy. They really rolled out the asphalt carpet for her. So yeah, so people have noticed, and some people are really upset. Even India no longer respects the leaders of the free world. Oh, Germany is the free world apparently. German foreign minister arrives in India with no officials receiving her. India wouldn't last 12 days without German support. Now, this is extraordinarily delusional thinking, but yeah, that's what they believe. So the West is now still trying to hold on to its vestiges of greatness and glory, and its so-called self-appointed designation as the leader of the free world. And yeah, the US is apparently the leader of the free world, but Germany as a vassal is one of the leaders of the free world. So yes, that's the kind of messaging that was given by India to Germany. So yeah, excuse me. In diplomacy, there's a whole range, a whole spectrum of messaging that you can use to convey your point across, and this is one of the ways you do it. So the lady was not mistreated in any way whatsoever. She was given a welcome. I'm sure the accommodation, everything must have been excellent for her, like all other foreign ministers. The only thing missing was a red carpet treatment and a group of Indian officials there to receive her. That was missing. So that's a very subtle but not so subtle message to Germany. Mind your own goddamn business. You are no one to lecture us. Uh, so yeah, that's what happened as part of the foreign ministers meeting of the G20 nations, the largest G20 foreign ministers meeting in history. But it failed to arrive to a consensus because the West insisted on using certain language in the final document that China and Russia did not agree to. So India, at the end of the day, put out a document by the chair which summarized everything that was discussed and also included the paragraphs that all nations did not agree to, and it was made very explicit that all nations don't agree to this. So that is the G20 foreign ministers meeting. So right now there's a competition going on. There's a global realignment that's happening. The West is still trying to hang on to its self-appointed role as the leader of the free world, but that is no longer, going down well with everybody, and there's a lot of pushback. So there's a lot of maneuvering and jousting that's happening for geopolitical advantage, and the backdrop of all of that is the Ukraine conflict, which seems to be the defining geopolitical conflict of our times, of the 21st century thus far.